On Christmas Eve, snow buried the roads and silenced every light beyond Caleb Mercer's cabin. Then a German shepherd appeared at his door, exhausted but unwilling to rest. The dog had crossed 3 miles of winter because 6 people had been forgotten. Caleb thought he was being asked to rescue them, but the truth was more complicated. Inside Haven Ridge, he found courage, responsibility, and a mission one man had left unfinished. Beacon did not simply lead a former Navy SEAL through the snow. He led him back to life. Tell us where you are watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and create more meaningful stories. The storm made Silver Pine look inhabited by lights rather than people. From the rise above town, the houses were almost invisible beneath fresh snow. Only their windows remained, small squares of amber between dark pines and the pale winter sky. The church steeple vanished whenever the snowfall thickened, then returned like something remembered. Caleb Mercer watched from the kitchen window of his cabin. At 59, he still carried the broad shoulders and upright posture of a man whose body had once been trained to answer before thought caught up. 8 years out of the Navy had not erased the strength in his back or forearms, but time had changed how he used it. He saved motion, measured distance, and gave his left knee a second before trusting it with his weight. His face was long and weathered, his nose bent slightly left from an old injury. Brown-gray hair, longer than military regulations would once have allowed, had been pushed back carelessly by one hand. A short, salt-and-pepper mustache framed a mouth more familiar with restraint than complaint. Hazel eyes rested on the storm without challenging it. Winter was not an enemy, it was a fact. The coffee in his hand had gone cold. Caleb drank it anyway. 3 years earlier, Evelyn would have taken the mug from him and made another pot, telling him endurance was not the same as good sense. Even during her illness, she had remained attentive to the small comforts of a shared life. Fresh coffee, clean sheets, a lamp left on for whoever came home last. After she died, Caleb kept the lamp and abandoned nearly everything else. He still drove into town for groceries, repaired a loose gutter if asked, and returned borrowed tools cleaner than he received them. But he stopped attending church suppers. He left invitations unanswered until people learned how to be kind without coming too close. He was not miserable. He had simply reduced life to things that could be checked, repaired, stacked, or locked. Outside, a hard gust pressed snow against the western wall. The shed door answered with a hollow knock. Caleb checked the clock. 6:17. The county forecast had placed the worst of the storm after midnight, but the mountains kept their own schedules. He changed for the weather. The combat shirt he pulled on had an olive-drab body and muted camouflage sleeves crossed by reinforced bands at the upper arms. It carried no patches or rank. He added dark work trousers, insulated boots, a bark-brown canvas parka, and a charcoal wool cap. On his left wrist sat a black-faced analog watch with a worn fabric strap. Evelyn had given it to him the year they bought the cabin. He checked the radio battery and the wood near the hearth, then stepped outside. Snow moved sideways through the porch light. Caleb crossed to the shed, cleared the lower hinge, and fitted a second wooden brace across the inside of the door. His knee tightened when he crouched. He paused and shifted his weight. Once, any delay caused by his own body had felt like betrayal. Now he treated pain the way he treated weather, useful information, nothing more. He secured the bolt and started back toward the cabin. Halfway across the yard, he heard something touch the front door. Not strike it, touch it. Caleb stopped. The wind moved through the pines with a low rushing sound. Snow whispered over the porch boards. Then, scrape. A pause. Scrape. Another pause. Scrape. 3 slow sounds against wood. He turned off his headlamp and listened. No barking. No human voice. No engine on the access road. A soft weight leaned against the door. Caleb approached along the porch rail. What looked like a drift beside the wall raised its head, and 2 amber eyes caught the kitchen light. A German shepherd stood beside the door. The dog was male, mature, and built for work. A black saddle covered his back, dipping lower on the right side like a dark wing. The rest of his coat was honey gold, though ice had darkened the chest and legs. One ear stood straight, the other angled slightly outward. He trembled hard, yet remained on his feet. Caleb kept his hands low. Easy. The shepherd did not retreat or rush toward the warmth visible behind the glass. He took one careful step forward and touched his nose to the inside of Caleb's wrist. Then he turned toward the forest. Beyond the yard, the old power line road vanished between the pines. Snow had already erased any tracks more than a few minutes old. The dog looked back at Caleb, moved 2 steps toward the porch stairs, and faced the trees again. His hind legs weakened. Caleb caught him before he reached the boards. "Not yet," he said quietly. He lifted the shepherd, one arm beneath the chest and the other behind the hind legs. Beneath the wet coat, the animal was lighter than a dog of his height should have been. Inside, Caleb expected him to move toward the hearth. Instead, the shepherd remained focused on the door. That was the first detail Caleb could not explain as instinct. He lowered the dog onto a folded wool blanket several feet from the fire. The shepherd tried to rise immediately. "Stay." The response was instant. The dog stopped and slowly settled back onto the blanket. Caleb studied him. "You know that one." He fed the fire gradually, then brought towels and a metal bowl containing a little water. Cold weather training had taught him to recognize exhaustion and dangerous chilling, but not enough to pretend he was a veterinarian. The dog drank only when offered the bowl and stopped when Caleb withdrew it. Another trained behavior. Caleb dried the chest and legs first. As the ice loosened, distinct markings appeared. A pale V of gold at the chest, a comma-shaped patch above the left eye, and broad paws packed with snow. A thick leather collar circled the dog's neck. A metal tag hung beneath it, sealed inside cloudy ice. Caleb removed the collar and placed it on a towel near the hearth. "You belong somewhere," he said. The dog's left ear tilted toward his voice, but his eyes returned to the door. For a moment, Caleb considered the simplest plan. Warm the dog, wait for the storm to pass, contact the county in the morning. It was reasonable. It also required him to ignore what the animal had already shown him. The shepherd pushed one foreleg beneath his chest. Caleb placed a steady hand against his shoulder. The dog did not resist. Instead, he leaned forward and touched his nose to Caleb's wrist again, directly over the watch Evelyn had given him. Then he pulled back, took 2 unsteady steps toward the door, and looked over his shoulder. There was a sequence to it. Contact, distance, direction, waiting. The animal was not restless. He was communicating. Meltwater ran from the tag by the fire. Caleb lifted it and rubbed away the frost with his thumb. A simple engraved lighthouse appeared first, 3 narrow beams spreading outward. Beneath it were block letters. Beacon on the reverse. Haven Ridge Community Residence. Caleb knew the place. An assisted living residence on the eastern side of the valley, beyond the old power corridor. 5 miles by road, perhaps 3 through the maintenance cut. That side of the valley had lost power shortly before dusk. Caleb looked at the dog. "Beacon!" Both ears lifted. He crossed to the emergency radio, extended the antenna, and switched on the unit. Static broke through the cabin's quiet. Beacon's head rose sharply. Caleb adjusted the frequency. A faint county signal came and went beneath the storm. The dog stood. His legs shook, but his attention had become absolute. He crossed the room, pressed his nose to Caleb's wrist, and stepped backward twice. Then he turned toward the door and waited. Beacon had found shelter, water, and warmth, yet none of those things had ended the behavior that brought him there. Caleb rested his thumb against the edge of his watch. For 3 years, he had arranged his life so that no one needed him without permission. The dog had not asked permission. He had come to the nearest light and trusted that someone would open the door. Caleb reached for the radio microphone. Somewhere beyond the snow-covered pines, something remained unfinished, and Beacon had spent the last of his strength making sure a stranger knew it. Static moved through the radio like wind through dry grass. Caleb held the microphone close, but did not speak immediately. The emergency set was old enough to require patience. Signals arrived in fragments, voices surfaced and vanished, and every burst of interference carried the temptation to fill in what had not actually been heard. Beacon stood beside him, unsteady but alert. The dog's breathing had slowed since entering the cabin, yet his attention remained fixed on the radio. Each time a voice broke through the static, his ears lifted. Each time the signal disappeared, he looked toward the door. Caleb pressed the transmit switch. "Silver Pine Emergency Net. This is Mercer on East Ridge Road. I have a working line German Shepherd here wearing identification from Haven Ridge community residents." He released the switch. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then a woman answered. "Caleb Mercer, this is Nora Bell. I hear you clearly enough." Caleb almost smiled. Of all the voices that might have reached him, Nora's was the least surprising. At 67, Nora Bell had retired from teaching history, but had never retired from knowing what everyone in Silver Pine was doing. She lived less than a mile from Caleb in a narrow house with a red metal roof and 3 radios on her dining room table. Years earlier, she had served on the town council, where she developed a reputation for remembering road easements, emergency budgets, and promises that officials hoped everyone else had forgotten. She was also one of the few people who still called Caleb every Sunday. Most weeks, she asked whether his pipes were holding and whether he needed anything from town. Caleb usually answered in 3 sentences or fewer. Nora never complained about the brevity. She simply called again the following week. "Evening, Nora," he said. "That remains to be determined. What condition is the dog in?" "Cold, exhausted, mildly dehydrated, no visible major injury. His name is Beacon." The silence on the other end changed. Not longer exactly, more deliberate. "Repeat the name." "Beacon. Tag says Haven Ridge community residence." Nora's voice lost its conversational warmth. The county board shows Haven Ridge evacuated before 5. Beacon shifted at the sound of the name. He touched his nose to Caleb's wrist, then looked toward the door. Caleb rested a hand lightly against the dog's shoulder. "The board may be wrong." Nora did not defend it. That was one reason Caleb trusted her. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. "Do not leave your radio." The channel returned to static. Caleb guided Beacon back to the blanket. The dog resisted only enough to make his preference clear, then settled when Caleb repeated the command to stay. A new voice came over the radio before Nora returned. Mr. Mercer, this is Dr. Marlene Shaw. Nora patched me into the net. Marlene Shaw ran the only veterinary clinic within 30 miles, though the title did not describe half of what she did. She treated ranch dogs, injured wildlife, barn cats, and occasionally the nervous pets of retirees who believed every missed meal signaled disaster. At 62, she had silver-brown hair she usually wore in a thick braid and the direct, patient manner of someone accustomed to frightened animals and anxious owners. She also held an amateur radio license and volunteered with the county's winter emergency network. Caleb described Beacon's condition without embellishment. "How long has he been inside?" Marlene asked. "About 20 minutes. Is he responsive?" "Yes." "Can he stand without assistance?" "For short periods." "Gum color?" Caleb crouched and carefully lifted Beacon's upper lip. "Pale pink. Improving?" "Any irregular breathing, coughing, confusion?" "No." "Good. Keep him several feet from direct heat. Small amounts of water only. Dry the paws, especially between the pads, but don't force the legs through a range of motion." Caleb followed her instructions while she spoke. Beacon watched his hands but showed no fear. "He understands commands," Caleb said. "Stay, at least." Samuel trained him well. The name arrived without explanation. Samuel Rowan, mountain search volunteer. Beacon was his dog. Caleb glanced at the shepherd. Marlene continued. Samuel moved into Haven Ridge after his heart condition worsened. He died early this winter. Beacon stayed with the residents afterward. Was he still active in search work? Not officially. Samuel kept up light training when he was able. Beacon knew snow tracking, indication work, and refind. Caleb looked toward the door. Explain refind. A dog locates a person or place, then leaves to find a handler or another human. He makes contact, gives a trained indication, and leads them back. Contact, distance, direction, waiting, the sequence repeated in Caleb's mind. He looked down at Beacon. "Find help," he said. The dog rose immediately. Fatigue remained visible in his legs, but hesitation did not. Beacon crossed to Caleb, pressed his nose against the inside of his wrist, backed away 2 steps, and turned toward the door. Marlene heard the movement through the radio. "What did he do?" Caleb described it. "That sounds intentional," she said, "but don't test him again. He needs rest." Caleb guided Beacon back to the blanket. The dog lay down, but his eyes remained open. For the first time since bringing him inside, Caleb felt the situation become larger than the cabin. Until then, there had been a cold animal, a name on a tag, and an address somewhere beyond the trees. Now there was a trained behavior designed around returning to someone who could not come alone. He lifted the microphone. "Nora, come back when you have Haven Ridge." Her answer arrived almost immediately. "I am here. The status still reads complete evacuation." "Who entered it?" "Transport Division. I'm pulling the incident notes now." Caleb could hear keys clicking in the background. Nora had likely taken over her dining table, maps open beneath her radio, reading glasses low on her nose, and a red pencil between her fingers. "I have the first shuttle," she said. 14 residents transferred to street. Luke's Church at 427. "And the rest?" "Second shuttle assigned at 5:10. 6 residents, 2 staff members." "Arrival confirmation?" A pause. "No individual names, only a completed route code." Caleb looked at Beacon. The dog's chest rose and fell beneath the wool blanket. "A route is not a head count," he said. "I am aware." Nora's answer was sharper than necessary. which told Caleb she was angry at herself for not seeing it first. She switched frequencies to contact County Dispatch, leaving Caleb and Marlene on the secondary channel. Several minutes passed. During that time, Caleb warmed another small amount of water and checked Beacon's paws. On the front right paw, 3 claws were black, and 1 was light brown. It was the kind of useless detail a person noticed only after responsibility had already begun. Nora returned with a different tone. The second shuttle never reached Haven Ridge. Caleb straightened. What happened? A pine came down across Ridgeway near the lower grade. A utility truck slid sideways while attempting to turn around. The shuttle driver marked the route as inspected and returned to the west shelter. And the system recorded that as evacuation complete. Yes. The words sat between them. No cruelty, no deliberate abandonment, no hidden decision made by a single person. Only a category selected under pressure, a software field interpreted incorrectly, and a radio tower that stopped working before anyone corrected it. Haven Ridge had not been ignored. It had been translated into the wrong line on a screen. Nora spoke again, quieter now. The repeater serving the East Valley went down just before 6. Landlines are out there as well. How many people remain? Potentially 8. Caleb's gaze moved to the windows. Snow covered the glass in shifting patterns, whitening the world beyond it. Beacon raised his head. This time, Caleb did not need the dog to move. The radio crackled, and a man introduced himself as Harold Vance, County Emergency Coordinator. Harold's voice carried the strain of someone speaking to several people at once. He was 63, a former public works supervisor who had spent most of his career learning that every winter emergency was partly weather and partly paperwork. In public meetings, he appeared formal and cautious, with iron-gray hair, heavy eyebrows, and a habit of rubbing the bridge of his nose before giving an answer he knew would disappoint someone. "Mr. Mercer," Harold said, "we have initiated a welfare response to Haven Ridge. What is the estimated arrival?" "The main road is blocked in 2 locations. Fire and medical units cannot pass until Public Works clears the lower grade." "How long?" "Several hours under current conditions." "Any approach from the east?" "Not for full-size vehicles." Caleb unfolded a county map on the table. "There is an old power line maintenance cut from East Ridge." "I know the line you mean. It is not approved as an emergency route. It is too narrow for an ambulance, not for a snowmobile." Harold went silent. When he answered, his voice was firm. "I am not authorizing a civilian to enter an unverified mountain route alone during a storm." Caleb felt the old part of himself push forward, the part that disliked hesitation when minutes mattered. He stopped it before it reached his voice. Harold was not an obstacle. He was responsible for preventing a second emergency while managing the first. "What would make the route acceptable?" Caleb asked. That question changed the conversation. Harold exhaled. "Continuous radio contact, GPS beacon, cold weather supplies, a second operator with appropriate equipment, and confirmation that the southern portion of the trail has not washed out or been blocked." Nora cut in. "Arthur Pike maintained the generator at Haven Ridge for 6 years. He knows that service road." Caleb knew Arthur. Nearly everyone in Silver Pine did. Arthur Pike was 71, broad through the chest and forearms, with iron-gray hair around a mostly bare crown, and hands built by 4 decades of repairing agricultural machinery. He owned a tracked utility vehicle, a workshop full of parts no manufacturer made anymore, and a firm belief that Caleb's isolation was both unnecessary and mildly insulting. Arthur keeps the tracked rig at the north storage barn, Nora continued. The barn opens onto the maintenance cut. Harold did not approve immediately. He asked for fuel capacity, vehicle weight, weather clearance, radio range, and the condition of the bridge crossing. Nora answered some questions from Old Town records. Caleb answered others from memory. Marlene interrupted twice to remind them that Beacon could not be expected to travel on foot in his present condition. The discussion became practical. That steadied Caleb more than reassurance would have. At last, Harold said, "I will contact Pike. If he agrees, and if both vehicles carry trackers, you may proceed as a support team. You do not operate independently of county direction. You turn back if communication fails or terrain becomes unstable." "Understood." "I mean it, Mercer." "So do I." The channel fell quiet. Caleb remained beside the table, one hand resting on the map. Beacon lay near the door, no longer trying to stand. He watched Caleb with the patience of an animal that had completed the part of the task he knew how to do. The decision in front of Caleb was no longer whether someone should go. Someone had to. The harder question was whether Caleb could lead without confusing leadership with control, whether he could enter uncertain ground while depending on Nora's information, Harold's limits, Marlene's judgment, Arthur's machinery, and a tired dog's memory of the way home. For years, he had avoided responsibility by calling it peace. Now responsibility had arrived wearing a frozen leather collar. The radio sounded once more. Nora's voice came through. "Arthur says he'll meet you at the north storage barn." Caleb closed his eyes for half a second. Then he folded the map along its worn creases. "Tell Harold I'll transmit when I leave the cabin." He looked toward Beacon. The shepherd's left ear angled toward him. Caleb did not promise that everything would be all right. He had lived too long to make promises the weather could break. Instead, he began laying out the equipment he would need. The system had said Haven Ridge was safe. Beacon had crossed 3 miles of winter to say otherwise. And this time, someone was listening. Caleb packed the snowmobile with the same care he once reserved for equipment checks before deployment. The similarity unsettled him. He laid out each item on the kitchen table before moving it outside. First aid kit, thermal blankets, signal lamps, spare batteries, tow line, folding shovel, water, radio, compass, and a small GPS beacon provided by the county. Nothing was added because it might be useful. Everything had a purpose. Beacon watched from the blanket near the hearth. The shepherd had recovered enough to hold his head upright, but fatigue still lived in the slow rise of his chest. Caleb had no intention of making him cross the forest on foot. He padded the snowmobile's cargo sled with 2 wool blankets, added a wind cover, and left enough space for the dog to change position without standing. When Caleb returned to the kitchen, the map remained open beneath the hanging lamp. The maintenance trail was drawn as a thin, broken line, almost an afterthought beside the county roads. It left East Ridge, crossed an old utility corridor, descended near a stream, and curved toward Haven Ridge from the north. Caleb placed one hand on the paper. For a moment, the cabin disappeared. He remembered another map spread across another table years earlier. Different mountains, different weather. A younger version of himself studying a route while men waited for his decision. The storm had shifted faster than predicted. Visibility had collapsed. Caleb had ordered the team to withdraw from the slope before the entire route closed. The decision had followed procedure. One man had still failed to return. No hearing had blamed Caleb. No superior had questioned the order. His teammates had told him the conditions left no better choice. That had never stopped him from revisiting the minutes. He had examined each instruction, each pause, each turn in the weather, until memory became less like the past and more like a room he entered whenever responsibility came too close. After Evelyn died, he had found a way to stop entering that room. He stopped leading anything. The soft tap of a claw against wood brought him back. Beacon had risen and crossed to the cargo sled near the door. He touched one paw to the side as though reminding Caleb that preparation was not the same as departure. Caleb folded the map and placed it in the worn canvas case he carried at his hip. All right. He helped Beacon into the sled, secured the wind cover below the dog's shoulders, and checked the straps twice. Beacon did not resist. He turned once, settled into the blankets, and rested his muzzle along the padded edge. Caleb switched off the cabin lights, leaving only the porch lamp burning. Then he started the snowmobile. The engine broke the night silence with a rough mechanical growl. Snow lifted beneath the track as Caleb guided the machine down the access road. Nora's voice followed him through the radio headset. "Signal is steady. I have your location." "Copy. Arthur is waiting at the north storage barn. Harold wants position reports every 15 minutes. "Understood." The road into the forest was no longer visible, but Caleb knew the alignment from the fence posts and the slope of the land. Moonlight filtered through the clouds in pale intervals, turning the snowfield silver before darkness closed over it again. Beacon remained quiet behind him. At the storage barn, an amber worklight glowed above the open doors. Arthur Pike stood beside a tracked utility vehicle with its engine running. He was shorter than Caleb, but broader through the chest, wrapped in a brown duck canvas coat over dark work overalls. A bright orange wool cap covered the bare crown of his head, leaving thick white eyebrows exposed above a square, wind-reddened face. His hands were large, scarred by years of machinery, and bare despite the cold, as he tightened a strap over the generator in the vehicle bed. Arthur looked first at Caleb, then at Beacon. "You made him ride?" "He's exhausted." "Good. Means you're not as stubborn as advertised." Caleb removed his helmet. "I heard the same thing about you." Arthur gave him a crooked smile. Their history was not openly hostile. It was made of unfinished invitations. Arthur had asked Caleb to join the volunteer winter crew twice. He had invited him to help inspect generators before storm season, and once offered him a seat at the diner after Evelyn's memorial service. Caleb had declined every time. Arthur had eventually stopped asking politely. Now the old mechanic walked around the snowmobile, inspected the cargo hitch, and pulled once on the sled strap. "County gave you a tracker?" Caleb showed him. "Fuel? Full tank and reserve? Radio?" "Tested." Arthur nodded toward the maintenance trail. "Bridge should hold. No guarantee about the north grade." Harold's voice came over the radio. "Support team. Confirm 2 operators and 2 vehicles." Caleb answered for himself. Arthur answered separately. Harold reviewed the conditions again. "Maintain contact. Do not separate beyond visual range. Turn back if the trail failed or either vehicle could no longer operate safely." Arthur waited until the instructions ended. "He always sound like that?" "Like what?" "Like every sentence has been reviewed by 3 lawyers. He's trying to keep us alive." Arthur climbed into his vehicle. "Well, that ruins my joke." They entered the maintenance trail with Caleb leading. The forest closed around them almost immediately. Pine branches bent low beneath the snow, forming white arches over the narrow route. The snowmobile passed easily beneath them. Arthur's vehicle followed more slowly, its tracks grinding through the deeper drifts. The trail vanished several times beneath fallen powder. At the first fork, Caleb stopped. One branch descended toward the stream. The other followed the power poles east. Neither had been used recently. He lifted Beacon from the sled and kept one hand beneath the dog's chest until his legs steadied. "Find home." Beacon lowered his head. He moved toward the eastern branch, paused near a buried fence line, then looked back. Caleb checked the map. The direction matched. Beacon returned to the sled without prompting. Arthur watched from his cab. "He always that businesslike?" "Apparently. Reminds me of my second wife." Caleb looked at him. Arthur waited a beat. "She was considerably shorter." They continued. The lightness of the remark did not erase the danger of the route, but it changed the shape of the silence between them. At the next junction, Beacon chose the descending trail. Caleb followed for 50 yards before the sound of water became audible beneath the wind. The map showed the maintenance route remaining above the stream. He stopped and checked his compass. Beacon stood in the snow, nose lifted, turning slowly as the wind crossed the ravine. The dog took several steps toward the water again, but without the certainty he had shown before. Caleb crouched beside him. The shepherd was not confused in the human sense. He was working with scent scattered by wind, terrain, and fatigue. Caleb looked uphill and found the faint line of an old stone fence beneath the snow. The correct trail ran beside it. He touched Beacon's shoulder and guided him back. "Not that way." The dog followed without resistance. Arthur pulled alongside. "Problem?" "Wind carried the scent down the ravine. So the dog can be wrong. So can the map." Arthur looked at the half-buried fence. "And you." Caleb met his eyes. "And me." There was unexpected relief in saying it aloud. They crossed the wooden utility bridge one vehicle at a time. Caleb went first, listening for any change in the structure beneath the snowmobile. The timbers held. Arthur followed at a crawl, the generator rocking slightly behind him. Beyond the bridge, the trail climbed sharply. The tracked vehicle made it halfway up the slope before its engine coughed. Arthur eased off the throttle. The engine coughed again and died. Caleb stopped above him. "I'll come down." "Stay where you are." Arthur opened the engine compartment and leaned into the wind. Caleb ignored the instruction and descended on foot, boots sinking nearly to the knee. The fuel line had worked loose at a coupling, likely shaken by the rough bridge approach. Arthur removed one glove and tried to tighten it, but his fingers had stiffened in the cold. "Give me the wrench," Caleb said. "I have it." "You can't feel your hand." "I can feel enough to know you're annoying." Caleb held out his palm. Arthur stared at it, then surrendered the wrench. Caleb stabilized the coupling while Arthur reseated the line. The work required both of them, one pair of hands holding the fitting steady, the other tightening it without damaging the threads. Snow collected across Arthur's shoulders. When they finished, Caleb looked up the trail. "I can take Beacon ahead while you restart." "No. If the vehicle doesn't turn over, it will. And if it doesn't..." Arthur closed the engine cover. "Then you wait. Haven Ridge may not have time for us to wait." Arthur's expression changed. The humor left it, but not the steadiness. "You think every minute spent accepting help is a minute wasted?" Caleb said nothing. Arthur wiped his hands on his coat. "Men like us get used to being useful. Then we start believing usefulness means going alone. It doesn't." The words struck harder because Arthur did not speak them gently. He climbed back into the cab and turned the key. the engine started. Arthur looked through the windshield at Caleb. "See? You held the line. I fixed the machine. Neither one worked without the other." Caleb stepped away from the vehicle. The argument was over, though the thought remained. They resumed the climb. The storm weakened as they reached the higher ground. Snow still fell, but the clouds thinned enough for the moon to spread across the utility corridor. The world opened into pale slopes and dark trees. Nora reported their position. Harold confirmed that the county rescue vehicle was still working toward the southern road. Caleb gave a brief update and kept moving. At the final junction, Beacon stood in the sled before Caleb could unfasten him. His ears were fully upright. Caleb released the wind cover. The dog stepped into the snow and turned toward a line of trees on the right. Beyond them, nearly hidden by the slope, a roof emerged beneath the moonlight. Haven Ridge. The building sat low against the hillside, its long windows mostly dark. Yet 3 of them held a faint yellow glow, not electric light, but the uneven flicker of lanterns or battery lamps. Caleb felt his breathing change. People were there. Beacon started forward, then stopped. He looked back at Caleb. The shepherd did not run ahead. He waited until Caleb reached him, then moved again at a measured pace. Together they followed the side of the building. Snow had sealed the main entrance nearly to the handles, but Beacon continued around the corner toward a narrower service door protected by an overhanging roof. He touched his nose to the door, then looked at Caleb. Arthur brought the tracked vehicle to a stop behind them. The generator's metal frame creaked as the engine settled. Caleb placed one gloved hand against the door. Only then did he understand the full meaning of Beacon's restraint. Samuel had not merely taught the dog to find a destination. He had taught him to return with someone, to check the distance, to wait, to make sure the person following did not disappear along the way. Caleb looked back at Arthur, still climbing down from the cab with his tools. For years, Caleb had believed leadership meant arriving first and carrying more than anyone else. Beacon stood beside him in the snow, waiting for the others to catch up. Leading, Caleb realized, was not the same as leaving people behind. When Arthur reached the door, Caleb raised his hand and knocked. From somewhere inside the building came the sound of movement, then a woman's voice, cautious but clear. "Who's there?" "Caleb Mercer," he called through the door. "Arthur Pike is with me. County Emergency Management knows we're here." No one opened immediately. Caleb heard a metal latch shift, followed by a pause long enough to suggest that the person inside was checking more than his name. "Radio identification?" the woman asked. Caleb gave his call sign. Arthur supplied his own. Only then did the lock turn. The door opened 6 inches, releasing a narrow breath of stale, cool air. A woman looked through the gap. She was in her mid-60s, with a full, steady face and dark hair threaded with silver, gathered into a low braided knot. A plum-colored insulated vest covered teal work clothes. One hand remained on the door while the other held a flashlight at chest height. Her eyes moved from Caleb to Arthur, then to Beacon. The caution left her face. "Beacon!" The dog stepped forward, but he did not force the opening. His body leaned toward the familiar voice while he waited for the door to move. The woman opened it wider. Beacon entered first. Relief touched her expression for only a moment before discipline returned. "I'm Gloria Finch, night manager," she said. "Come in quickly. We're keeping the inner doors closed." Caleb and Arthur brought the equipment inside, then pulled the service door shut against the wind. The hallway beyond it was dark except for battery lanterns placed at floor level. Towels had been rolled against the bottoms of several doors to block drafts. Paper signs redirected foot traffic away from the colder wings of the building. Nothing about the place suggested panic. It suggested long hours of people working with less than they needed. "How many are here?" Caleb asked. 6 residents. 2 staff, including me." "Medical concerns?" "Ruth has the list." Gloria did not wait for him to offer instructions. She turned and moved down the corridor with the swift, deliberate pace of someone who already knew the next 10 things that required attention. Arthur glanced at Caleb. "Looks like they started without us." "They had to." They followed. The temperature dropped as they passed the central lobby. Haven Ridge was a low, wide building designed more like a mountain lodge than an institution. Framed photographs of summer picnics and autumn craft fairs lined the walls. A wooden handrail ran the length of the corridor. Someone had wrapped a string of paper snowflakes around it for Christmas. Without the overhead lights, the decorations looked strangely intimate, as if the building had drawn its remaining warmth inward. The residents had been gathered in a small sitting room near the center of the structure. Its 2 doors were closed, and blankets had been pinned over the windows. 3 battery lanterns cast a soft gold light over armchairs arranged in a loose circle. A woman in navy medical scrubs knelt beside an oxygen concentrator connected to a backup power unit. She had short, copper-gray curls, a compact build, and freckled hands that moved quickly while her voice remained slow. "Walter, leave the mask where it is," she said. "You're getting air. Listen to me, not the wind." The man in the chair was tall even in age, though his shoulders curved inward beneath a camel cardigan. Thin white hair lay neatly across his head. A clear oxygen tube ran beneath his nose, but he kept lifting one hand toward it whenever a gust struck the windows. His pale blue eyes fixed on the dark glass. Then Beacon entered the room. The shepherd's fatigue seemed to fall away for 3 steps. Several residents spoke his name at once. Beacon moved among them without excitement, touching a knee here, lowering his head beneath a hand there. He accepted their relief as though it were part of a familiar routine. When he reached the tall man, he stopped. Walter Ames looked down. His hand, halfway to the oxygen tubing again, changed direction and settled on Beacon's head. The dog leaned against his leg and rested his muzzle across Walter's knee. "Found your way back," Walter whispered. Beacon's left ear angled outward. Walter's breathing remained uneven, but his hand began moving slowly through the thick fur at the dog's neck. Each stroke lasted longer than the one before. The sharp rise of his shoulders softened. The nurse checked the oxygen flow and adjusted the tubing. "Better," she said. "Stay with that rhythm." She looked up at Caleb. Ruth Calder, licensed practical nurse. "He's stable, but the anxiety is making the breathing harder." "Anything you need from me?" The question seemed to surprise her. Not because help was unwelcome, Caleb realized, but because she had expected him to tell her what he planned to do. Ruth pointed toward the hallway. "Gloria has the medication list. We have 1 resident with diabetes, 1 with limited mobility, and 2 who should be checked at a hospital once transport arrives. No immediate crisis. What we need most is steady heat and no unnecessary movement." Caleb nodded. "Arthur brought a generator." "Then Arthur is my favorite person in the building." From the doorway, Arthur said, "Give it 10 minutes before you commit." Ruth's mouth moved in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Gloria returned with a clipboard and a ring of color-coded keys. A small brass whistle hung among them. "Our main generator failed to start after the power went down," she said. The portable backup is keeping the oxygen unit and one refrigerator running. We shut off everything else. Arthur took the clipboard from her only after she offered it. Where's the mechanical room? West Hall, through the laundry area. The circulation system was making noise before it stopped. Show me. Caleb expected Gloria to lead them both. Instead, she pointed to him. I need the north exit checked. Snow was pushing against it before dark. Then inspect the kitchen vent and the fireplace flue in this room. We're using candles only when necessary, but I want no buildup from any heating source. Caleb felt an old reflex rise. The urge to gather all information, assign tasks, and establish a single chain of command. He let it pass. This is your building, he said. Anything else? Gloria studied him briefly, then handed him a small master key. Room checks are complete, but confirm the east hallway is empty. Beacon came from that direction before I sent him out. You sent him? Her hand tightened around the keyring. Our radio failed. The landline was already down. Samuel taught me the command during a drill last year. Her eyes shifted toward the sitting room. I thought it was mostly to make me feel prepared. What command? Find help. The words were simple. Gloria did not dramatize them. I opened the service door, she continued. Beacon looked at me once and I gave the command. He left. Caleb pictured the dog crossing the maintenance corridor alone, following whatever light, scent, or memory eventually brought him to the cabin. Now that was a hard call. It was the only call left. Her voice remained steady, but the brass whistle on the key ring trembled faintly against the metal. Caleb understood then that competence did not cancel fear. It merely gave fear a task. He closed his hand around the master key. I'll check the east hall. The work divided naturally after that. Arthur disappeared with Gloria toward the mechanical room, pushing a cart loaded with tools and cables. Ruth remained with the residents, checking medications and recording temperatures. Nora's voice came through Caleb's radio, relaying updates from Harold and the county rescue team. Caleb inspected the north exit, cleared the interior frame, and confirmed the door could still open inward. He checked the kitchen ventilation and the flue. In the east wing, the air was colder, but every resident room stood empty as Gloria had reported. No one had been forgotten inside the building. That realization mattered. Haven Ridge had disappeared from the county's screen, but the people inside it had continued counting one another. When Caleb returned to the central corridor, the generator started outside with a low mechanical thrum. A few seconds later, one bank of hallway lights flickered on. Not all of them. Just enough. Warm air did not arrive immediately, but pipes began to tick inside the walls. Arthur emerged from the laundry area with grease across one cheek and his orange cap pushed back. Generators carrying the west circulation pump, he said. Main unit has a starter fault. We can heat the center rooms and the medical refrigerator, but not the full building. That's enough, Gloria said. Arthur looked almost offended. It will have to be. The temperature in the sitting room rose by degrees. Coats remained on. Blankets stayed wrapped around shoulders. But the residents began speaking more freely. A retired accountant named Lillian organized cups on a tray. Another resident, Mr. Cooper, insisted on checking the battery lanterns despite the fact that Ruth had already done so. No one was asked to sit quietly and wait to be saved. Caleb carried hot water from the kitchen, while Nora transmitted messages from relatives through the radio. Gloria repeated each one carefully, making sure names and details were correct. The building became a network of small, useful acts. On his third trip down the east corridor, Caleb noticed Beacon sitting at the far end. The dog faced a closed door. He was not scratching or whining. He simply sat with his weight balanced evenly, eyes fixed on the lock. Caleb approached and checked the number. The room had no residential nameplate. Only a faded paper star remained taped to the wood. Beacon. The shepherd looked at him, then returned his attention to the door. Gloria came around the corner carrying folded blankets. "He's been doing that since Samuel died," she said. Caleb tried the handle. Locked. "Is anyone inside?" "No, it was the old community room. We closed it after the funeral and moved activities to the West Lounge." "Why?" Gloria's gaze rested on the faded star. "Because no one was ready to sort through what he left there." Caleb looked down at Beacon. The dog lowered himself to the floor, still facing the door. For one brief moment, Caleb felt the pull of the unknown room, the human desire to open whatever remained closed and give its contents meaning. But Ruth called from the sitting room, asking for assistance moving an oxygen cylinder. Caleb stepped away. The room could wait. The people could not. 2 hours remained before the county's tracked rescue vehicle was expected to reach them from the south. Ruth recommended hospital evaluation for Walter and another resident with a heart condition, but neither was deteriorating. Gloria updated the medication chart. Arthur remained near the generator, listening to its rhythm through the walls. Caleb sat beside Walter after carrying in the replacement cylinder. Beacon lay between them, finally asleep. Walter's breathing had steadied. One hand rested loosely on the dog's shoulder. "You do this often?" he asked. "What?" "Come through storms with machinery and maps?" "Not anymore." Walter opened an old brass pocket watch, studied its face, and closed it again. "I worked the railroad 42 years, he said. "Retired and thought I'd never need any of it again. Tonight I've been keeping time for Ruth's checks." Across the room, Lillian poured tea. Arthur adjusted a cable near the doorway. Ruth wrote medication times in a notebook. Gloria spoke into Caleb's radio while Nora repeated the county's latest update. Walter followed Caleb's gaze. "Funny thing," he said. "Nobody in this room is doing the job they used to have." He touched the pocket watch with one finger. "But everybody's using what they still know." Caleb looked at Beacon, asleep at the feet of people who had spent the night refusing to let one another disappear. The words did not feel like advice. They felt like a fact. And facts, Caleb had learned, were often the hardest things to argue with. The county rescue vehicle arrived shortly before dawn. Its wide tracks announced it before the headlights appeared, grinding slowly through the snow beyond Haven Ridge. No sirens crossed the ridge. No one rushed through the halls shouting instructions. The vehicle stopped near the service entrance, and 2 emergency medical technicians entered carrying compact bags, portable monitors, and the tired focus of people who had already worked through most of the night. By then, the center of Haven Ridge had grown warm enough for the residents to remove their outer coats. Arthur's generator continued its steady rhythm outside. The circulation pump clicked through the walls, pushing heat into only a handful of rooms. But those rooms were enough. Ruth had kept her notes current. Gloria had medication lists ready. Each resident was assessed where they sat before anyone was asked to move. Caleb remained near the doorway of the sitting room, answering questions only when they were directed at him. The work belonged to Ruth now. She gave the paramedics concise reports. Oxygen levels, medication times, symptoms, changes since the power failure. Walter would be taken to the county hospital for observation, not because his condition had become critical, but because the long period of cold and anxiety warranted caution. Another resident with a heart condition would go with him. The remaining 4 would be transported to St. Luke's Church, where cots, meals, and backup heat had been prepared. Walter objected when the paramedic suggested a wheelchair. "I can walk," he said. "I believe you," Ruth replied. "The chair's for the icy hallway, not your dignity." Walter considered that distinction, then allowed them to help him. Beacon followed beside the chair. The dog's steps were slow now. Exhaustion had returned after the urgency of reunion passed, but he stayed close to Walter's right side as the group moved through the corridor. At the service entrance, Walter opened his brass pocket watch and checked the time. 5:38, he said to no one in particular. Late, but still running. Caleb could not tell whether he meant the watch, himself, or the building. The residents left one at a time. Gloria checked each name against her clipboard before the door closed behind them. She did not rely on memory, reassurance, or what someone else claimed to have completed. Only when the final transport departed did she draw a line beneath the last name. "Now we're evacuated," she said. The sky had begun to lighten over the trees. Snow still covered the road, but the darkness had thinned to a cold blue. Public works crews were clearing the lower grade, and the county had established a temporary route for tracked vehicles. A second utility vehicle arrived carrying Harold Vance. Caleb recognized him from public meetings, though they had never spoken at length in person. Harold was 63, heavy-browed and broad through the middle, with iron-gray hair flattened beneath a county-issued wool cap. His insulated coat was zipped unevenly, and fatigue had deepened the lines beside his mouth. He carried a binder under one arm. The first thing he did was ask Gloria for the final head count. The second was apologize. "I relied on the system status," he said. "I did not make the final verification call myself." Gloria stood in the lobby with her clipboard pressed against her vest. The tower was down. That explains why the call might not have connected. It does not explain why I did not try. Harold did not blame the shuttle driver. He did not mention the software until Gloria asked how the error had occurred. "The driver marked the route inspection complete," he said. "The evacuation dashboard converted that code into site completion. The wording is too similar, and the review step is inadequate." "Will that be in the report?" Caleb asked. Harold looked at him. "All of it." There was no defensiveness in the answer, only weariness. "I'll request a formal review," Harold continued. "Separate codes, named confirmation for every resident. Manual verification before a location is removed from the active board." Gloria studied him for a moment. "And if someone asks who approved the current process?" "I did." That answer changed the air between them. Not enough to erase the failure, enough to make repair possible. Arthur emerged from the West Hall carrying a tool bag. "Main generator needs a new starter assembly," he said. "I can source one after the roads open." Harold opened the binder. "I'll authorize the emergency purchase." "You'll authorize the good one," Arthur said. "Not the cheapest one that promises to be just as reliable." Harold rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Send me the model number." Arthur nodded, apparently satisfied that this counted as agreement. With the residents gone and the building secured, Haven Ridge became quieter than Caleb expected. The lanterns had been turned off one by one. Morning light entered through the uncovered windows, revealing cups on tables, folded blankets, and the faint tracks of boots across the floor. Beacon returned to the east hallway. He stopped before the locked community room and sat. Gloria found Caleb watching him. "I suppose we can open it now," she said. She selected a yellow-tagged key from her ring. The lock resisted at first. Gloria pressed her shoulder gently against the door while turning the key, and the seal finally released with a dry scrape. Dust moved in the thin morning light. The room had once been cheerful. Faded paper stars hung from the ceiling. Shelves along one wall held board games, knitting baskets, and plastic containers marked with handwritten labels. Several tables had been pushed together as though a group had expected to return the next day. Photographs covered the far wall. In them, Beacon looked younger and leaner. He wore an orange and olive working harness beside a tall man with a narrow face, a white beard, and a red winter cap. Some pictures showed the pair crossing snowy fields. Others showed them inside Haven Ridge, surrounded by residents holding walking poles or cups of coffee. "Samuel Rowan," Gloria said. Beacon crossed the room and stopped beneath one photograph. Samuel stood in a training field, one hand raised in a signal. Beacon was several yards away, looking back over his shoulder toward a group of volunteers. "He spent 25 years in mountain rescue," Gloria continued. "Not full-time. He repaired elevators for a living. Rescue was what he did on weekends, holidays, and any night the pager went off." "Why Haven Ridge?" Caleb asked. His heart made the stairs at home difficult. He moved here because he could keep some independence. Gloria brushed dust from the edge of a table. "He kept training Beacon after he retired from fieldwork. Short sessions, nothing demanding. Then he started involving the residents." She pointed to another photograph. Walter stood between two chairs, one hand on a walking pole, Beacon beside him. Lillian was laughing in the background. Ruth held a stopwatch. "He used Beacon to make exercise feel less like therapy," Gloria said. "Walking routines, memory games, breathing exercises. If someone didn't want to leave their room, Samuel sent Beacon in with a soft toy and waited in the hall." Caleb looked at the pictures again. Samuel had not tried to preserve his old life exactly as it had been. He had translated it into something the people around him could use. That seemed harder than simply refusing to stop. A wooden cabinet stood near the back wall. Inside hung Samuel's red winter coat, still carrying a few white dog hairs along one sleeve. Below it sat a cardboard file box and a weathered black notebook. Gloria lifted the notebook carefully. "He was supposed to present this to the county in November." She handed it to Caleb. On the cover, written in block letters, were the words, "Winter Lantern Project." The first pages contained no dramatic manifesto. There were lists, people with four-wheel drive vehicles, retired nurses, homes using medical equipment, generators requiring inspection, residents who lived alone beyond reliable cell coverage. Samuel had drawn lines between them in pencil. A mechanic could check fuel systems before storms. A retired teacher could manage a call tree. Ranchers could provide vehicles suited to narrow roads. Veterans and former emergency workers could teach basic planning without taking control from official responders. At the top of one page, Samuel had written, "Do not build another rescue team. Build fewer emergencies." Caleb read the sentence twice. The project was not designed around brave people entering storms. It was designed around phone calls made before the wind rose, batteries checked while roads were still open, and names confirmed by actual voices rather than status codes. Further into the notebook, Caleb found a hand-drawn map of the Eastern Valley. The maintenance trail from his cabin to Haven Ridge had been marked in red pencil. Beside the line, Samuel had written, "Possible snowmobile access. Confirm landowner permission." Caleb's property was identified by parcel number, not his name. Samuel had known the cabin existed. He had simply never reached the point of asking. The realization carried no sense of fate. It felt more practical than that, and somehow more personal. There had been work waiting near Caleb's door long before Beacon arrived. Beacon had not brought him a secret. The dog had carried the unfinished edge of a plan across the snow. A vehicle stopped outside. A few minutes later, Denise Harper entered the room. She was 55, tall and lean, with straight dark hair tied low and a natural silver streak running from her right temple. A forest green search and rescue jacket covered a charcoal base layer. A silver whistle and black training clicker hung from a short cord near one shoulder. She greeted Gloria first, then crouched several feet from Beacon without reaching for him. "Beacon!" The dog looked toward her. Denise waited. After a moment, Beacon approached and sniffed her sleeve. His tail moved once. "Hello, old man," she said. Her voice softened, but her eyes remained professional. She checked his paws, gait, hydration, and response to simple cues. She did not test endurance or ask him to repeat the journey. "He needs rest and a full veterinary evaluation," she said. "No field work, no long training sessions." "He found my cabin," Caleb said. "I heard." He remembered the route back. He remembered parts of it. You and Arthur handled the rest. The correction was not unkind. Denise stood. Samuel was careful about that distinction. Beacon is intelligent, but he is not a compass, a medic, or a substitute for a team. Caleb glanced at the notebook in his hand. Was Samuel planning to bring him back into rescue? No. Community demonstrations, perhaps. Light search games. The structure helped both of them. Denise looked toward Beacon, who had settled beside Gloria. After Samuel died, everyone here was grieving. Beacon lost his handler, his schedule, and most of the cues that organized his day. That does not mean he was waiting for a new owner to appear. Caleb felt the statement land more sharply than he expected. "I didn't say it did." "No," Denise replied. "But people often confuse being chosen in one difficult moment with being chosen forever." The room remained still. Caleb looked at Beacon. The dog had crossed the forest to his cabin. He had trusted Caleb's voice, slept beside his fire, and followed him back through the snow. Somewhere during those hours, Caleb had begun imagining a future without admitting it to himself. A dog bed near the hearth, tracks around the cabin, a living presence in rooms that had been silent too long. The picture vanished as quickly as it formed. Denise's warning was not cruel. It was necessary. Beacon belonged to Haven Ridge, not as property in the cold sense, but as part of a web of relationships Caleb had only just entered. Gloria closed Samuel's cabinet. "You can take the notebook," she told Caleb. "For now." "Why me?" "Because you read maps. That can't be the only reason." "It isn't." She did not explain further. Outside, the morning had brightened. Walter's transport had been delayed while the lower road was cleared, and he waited in the heated county vehicle with a paramedic. Gloria walked Beacon outside to see him before departure. Caleb loaded his gear onto the snowmobile. Beacon stood near the tracked vehicle, his black and gold coat bright against the snow. Walter reached through the open door and rested a hand on the dog's head. When Caleb fastened the map case at his side, Beacon looked toward him. For 1 second, Caleb expected him to cross the distance. Beacon's tail moved once, then the dog turned and sat beside Walter's door. Caleb felt the absence before he had any right to call it one. He placed a hand over the notebook inside his coat. Loyalty, he understood, was not proved by following one person everywhere. Sometimes it was proved by knowing where to remain. Beacon had brought Caleb to Haven Ridge. Now he was staying with the people who had been waiting for him to come home. For the first 3 mornings after the storm, Caleb woke before dawn and listened for a dog that was not there. He did not expect barking. Beacon rarely barked without reason. What Caleb listened for was smaller. Claws shifting across the floorboards, the sound of a collar touching a water bowl, a long breath released near the hearth. The cabin gave him none of it. Before the storm, silence had been orderly. It had allowed Caleb to move from room to room without interruption, to leave a cup wherever he wanted and find it untouched hours later. Now the same silence felt constructed. He had built it carefully, closed it around himself, and mistaken the absence of demands for peace. The winter lantern notebook rested on the kitchen table. Caleb moved it twice during the first week, once to make room for breakfast, once to wipe dust from beneath it. He did not open it. Nora mailed him a photocopy anyway. The envelope arrived in his rural mailbox with a note written in red pencil. The original is not an excuse to avoid making comments. Mark this one. Caleb placed the copy beside Samuel's notebook. The following afternoon, Arthur drove up in an old pickup and returned a socket wrench Caleb had not realized was missing. He stood in the kitchen wearing his brown work coat, drank half a cup of coffee, and commented on the condition of the snowmobile belt. When he left, a folded meeting notice remained beneath the wrench. Caleb found it 5 minutes later. The first winter lantern planning session would be held at the volunteer fire station on Thursday evening. He put the notice in the stove. The corner caught, curled black, and went out before the rest of the paper burned. Caleb stared at it. Then he removed it with the fireplace tongs and set it on the stone hearth. On Wednesday, Ruth called. "We're updating the county map," she said. "There are home oxygen users beyond the standard plow routes. Harold wants alternate access marked before the next weather system. Harold has county maps. He has roads. We need routes." Caleb looked toward the canvas map case hanging beside the door. "I'm not joining a committee?" "I didn't ask you to join one." "What are you asking?" "For you to tell us where a snowmobile can pass without crossing private land or unstable ground." "That sounds like committee work." "No. Committee work has cookies." Caleb heard papers moving on her end of the line. "We need your knowledge, Caleb, not your biography." He agreed to mark 3 routes and deliver the pages to Nora. He did not attend the meeting. On Thursday evening, he remained at the cabin and repaired a loose stair tread that had not needed immediate repair. He knew the time without looking at his watch. At 7:15, he imagined folding chairs in the fire station, Nora correcting someone's terminology, Arthur complaining about the coffee, Harold carrying too many binders. At 7:40, Caleb went outside and split wood under the floodlight. By 8:30, the cold had stiffened his left knee, and the woodpile was larger than necessary. Nora called the next morning. "You missed a productive meeting." "I never said I was coming." "No. You carefully avoided saying anything that could later be interpreted as a commitment." Caleb leaned against the kitchen counter. "I'm not the right person to build a community organization. We are not building it around you. I have no experience in social services. Neither does Arthur. He has experience preventing generators from becoming decorative furniture." Caleb said nothing. Nora continued. "Ruth knows health planning. Harold knows county procedure. Denise knows search standards. I know which officials need to receive the same request 3 times before they acknowledge it. And what do you need me for? To read a map, keep your word, and arrive on time. That's all? No one needs a Navy SEAL legend, Caleb." Her voice was neither mocking nor impressed. "We need someone who can look at a route and say whether it is useful, foolish, or likely to become foolish after 6 inches of snow. Caleb looked at the half-burned meeting notice on the hearth. A laugh escaped him before he could stop it. It was brief and rough from disuse. Nora went quiet. "What?" he asked. "Nothing. I thought your radio had malfunctioned." The next meeting was scheduled for Monday. Caleb arrived 4 minutes early. The fire station's meeting room smelled of coffee, wet coats, and the rubber flooring used beneath the equipment bays. Folding tables had been pushed into a square. Samuel's notebook sat in the center, not displayed like a relic, but surrounded by forms, maps, and yellow legal pads. No one applauded when Caleb entered. Arthur looked at the clock, cutting it close. Nora slid a stack of route maps toward an empty chair. Ruth handed Caleb a pen. The lack of ceremony made staying easier. Harold opened the meeting by explaining that Winter Lantern could not operate as an independent rescue group. The county would not authorize volunteers to enter hazardous conditions, perform medical tasks, or make unverified welfare visits. Instead, the program would sit beneath 3 existing organizations: Emergency Management, the Volunteer Fire Department, and County Senior Services. Volunteers would undergo background checks and basic training. They would use call lists approved by residents or their families. No one would enter a home without permission unless official responders requested support. The program's work would begin before storms. Confirm who had heat. Confirm who needed medication deliveries. Check whether generators had fuel and had actually been started recently. Identify residents who had no reliable phone service. Report missed contacts early enough that bad weather did not turn concern into a rescue operation. Arthur proposed seasonal generator clinics. Ruth developed a 1-page winter health checklist written in plain language, with large print and no medical jargon. Nora designed a call tree that required spoken confirmation rather than unchecked boxes. Harold presented a revised evacuation procedure in which every remaining resident had to be identified by name before a site could be marked clear. Denise established firm boundaries for animal involvement. No dog, including Beacon, would be sent alone during dangerous weather. Any search-related activity would be limited to supervised demonstrations and low-risk exercises. When it was Caleb's turn, he unfolded the maps. He marked routes too narrow for emergency vehicles, but usable by approved tracked equipment. He identified 2 bridges that required inspection, a private gate whose owner needed to be contacted, and a drainage cut that appeared passable in summer but collected dangerous snow in winter. He did not present himself as an expert on everything. Once, Arthur corrected him about the weight limit of a utility trailer. Caleb changed the notation without argument. That small act drew no attention from anyone else. Caleb noticed it anyway. The program took shape over the following weeks. Not quickly, not cleanly. Insurance forms delayed volunteer registration. Several residents declined to participate because they disliked the idea of being placed on a vulnerable persons list. Nora changed the language to Winter Contact Registry, and most reconsidered. Arthur discovered that half the generators people claimed were ready had stale fuel, dead starter batteries, or instructions no one could find. Ruth removed 3 items from Harold's emergency checklist because they required training the volunteers would not have. Every meeting ended with more work than it began with. Caleb found that reassuring. Real systems were rarely born complete. Beacon returned to Haven Ridge after a veterinary examination and several quiet days of rest. Denise began short sessions in the residence courtyard. She used simple direction cues, brief searches for a familiar object, and long pauses between tasks. Caleb attended twice a week. Beacon did not greet him like a dog reunited with a lost owner. He approached, sniffed Caleb's hands, and waited. The relationship had to be rebuilt in ordinary time. Caleb learned which voice made Beacon attentive without tension. Beacon learned that Caleb would not repeat a command simply because the response was slow. Some days the dog worked well. On others, he became distracted by Walter's presence at the window or by the scent of food from the kitchen. Denise never treated those moments as failure. "He has a whole life here," she told Caleb. "Training has to fit inside it." The words applied more widely than she knew. After one session, Ruth joined Caleb for coffee in the Haven Ridge dining room. Snowmelt shone on the windows, and Beacon slept beneath Walter's chair. Ruth asked how long Caleb and Evelyn had lived at the cabin. 13 years. Did she like the winters? She liked the first snow. By February, she threatened to move to Arizona. Ruth smiled. Caleb found himself telling her about the flowers Evelyn planted beside the southern wall. Not the final year, when illness had reduced the garden to pots near the porch, but earlier seasons. Evelyn had kept testing varieties that local nurseries warned would not survive the elevation. She wrote planting dates on wooden sticks and saved seeds in paper envelopes. She liked proving people wrong? Ruth asked. She liked giving plants a fair chance to disagree. The memory did not arrive wrapped in grief. It was simply funny. That surprised Caleb more than the laughter had. He began speaking about Evelyn differently after that. With Nora, he remembered how she always prepared an extra serving at dinner in case a neighbor stopped by. With Arthur, he admitted that Evelyn had known far more about the cabin plumbing than Caleb did. Her life slowly became larger than its ending. The progress did not move in a straight line. During a February drill, volunteers practiced responding to a mock communications failure. The exercise included changing weather, incomplete information, and a simulated blocked route. Caleb was assigned to help evaluate options. When one radio message failed to arrive, the room seemed to narrow around him. For several seconds, he was no longer inside the fire station. He was studying another broken route, hearing another team wait for a decision no choice could make safe. Caleb ended the exercise early for his group. He gave no explanation. The next morning, he ignored 2 calls and did not attend the scheduled review. By afternoon, he had decided Winter Lantern would function better without him. Arthur arrived before dark, carrying a flashlight with a cracked switch. He sat at the kitchen table, opened a small tool roll, and began dismantling it. Caleb waited for the questions. None came. Arthur cleaned the contacts with a narrow brush. "You missed the review." "I know. Nora knows too." "I assumed she might." Arthur tested the spring. Caleb watched him work. "I may not be suited for this. Probably not every day. That isn't what I meant." "I know." Arthur replaced the switch and tightened the casing. "The group does not need you to be reliable every minute of your life." Caleb folded his arms. "Reliability is the point." "No, communication is the point." Arthur set the flashlight on the table. "If you cannot come, you call. If a drill brings up something you cannot handle that day, you say so. Then someone else takes your place." Caleb looked away. "And if there is no one else, then we built the network wrong." Arthur switched on the flashlight. A clear beam crossed the kitchen and rested on the closed door. "This is not a team designed around the strongest man in the room. It is designed so no one has to be that man." He pushed the repaired flashlight toward Caleb. "There. Works again. Still has a crack." After Arthur left, Caleb remained at the table. The flashlight lay beside Samuel's notebook and Nora's marked maps. Its beam worked despite the visible damage in the casing. Caleb called Ruth first and apologized for missing the review. Then he called Nora. "I'll be at the next meeting," he said. "I know," she replied. "How could you know?" Arthur took his smallest tool roll. Caleb looked toward the door and shook his head. Responsibility, he was beginning to understand, did not require him to carry every name, every route, and every possible outcome by himself. It required something quieter. Tell the truth when he could not continue. Leave enough information for someone else to step in. And trust that the work would not disappear simply because he needed to set it down. A year later, winter returned to Silver Pine without anger. Snow fell through a clear blue morning, light enough to gather on porch rails without hiding the roads beneath it. The pines along the eastern ridge wore narrow white lines on their branches. Smoke rose cleanly from chimneys across the valley, and holiday lights remained visible even after sunrise. From Caleb Mercer's porch, the town no longer looked like a scattering of distant houses. He knew who lived behind many of those windows now. The narrow ranch house near the frozen creek belonged to a retired nurse who kept 2 weeks of medication in a labeled box by the refrigerator. The blue-roofed cabin above Miller Road belonged to a widower whose generator had to be started by hand. The farmhouse near the southern tree line housed an older couple who refused help unless it was described as neighborly cooperation. Their names appeared on the Winter Lantern contact registry, but Caleb no longer thought of them as entries. Each name had a voice, a driveway, a stubborn habit, or a preferred kind of coffee. The emergency map on his kitchen wall had changed as well. Colored pencil lines marked snowmobile routes, tracked vehicle access, bridges with weight restrictions, and gates requiring advance permission. Beside the map hung a schedule listing call teams, equipment checks, and backup contacts. Nothing depended on one person remembering everything. That was the point. Winter Lantern now had 34 registered volunteers. Most were middle-aged or older. They included former teachers, mechanics, ranchers, public utility workers, retired nurses, veterans, church volunteers, and people who had spent decades learning practical things no formal database had ever recorded. They did not use titles like guardian or hero. They had assignments. Nora managed the communication tree from her dining room, where 4 radios now competed for space with paper maps and a ceramic bowl of red pencils. Arthur supervised generator inspections and had offended 3 manufacturers by publishing an honest comparison of their cold weather performance. Ruth trained volunteers to recognize problems without pretending to diagnose them. Denise handled animal-related demonstrations and made certain enthusiasm never outran safety. Harold Vance had spent the year rebuilding the county evacuation process. At the first public winter meeting, he stood before nearly 100 residents in the Haven Ridge dining room and described exactly what had failed the previous year. He did not speak in vague language. The transportation code had been unclear. The software had converted a route status into an evacuation status. The communication tower had failed. The final confirmation call had not been made. I approved a process that allowed a location to be marked clear without every remaining person being confirmed by name, Harold said. A projector displayed the old form beside the replacement. The new system required 2 separate confirmations, one from transportation and one from the receiving location. Every person had to be accounted for individually before a site could disappear from the active emergency board. If communication failed, the location remained open until someone physically verified it. No one applauded Harold's admission. That was not why he had made it. Questions followed. Some were angry, some were technical. A woman whose mother lived at Haven Ridge asked why anyone should trust the new process. Harold answered without defending himself. "You should not trust it because I say it is improved. You should ask us to demonstrate that it is." The sentence did not erase the previous winter. It gave the community something more useful than blame, a standard they could continue to test. After the meeting, Gloria led everyone into the renovated community room. The dust was gone. The old tables had been refinished, the paper stars replaced, and Samuel Rowan's photographs arranged along one wall. His red winter coat remained in the wooden cabinet, but the cabinet doors now stood open. Above it hung a carved wooden plaque. A lighthouse sent 3 narrow beams across the grain. Beneath it were the words, "No one winters alone." Gloria did not give a long speech. She spoke about Samuel's habit of noticing what people still knew how to do, even after age or illness changed what they could no longer do. Then she invited the volunteers to sign their names in a new winter lantern logbook. Walter Ames signed first. His hand trembled slightly, but his letters remained clear. Beacon sat beside him. The German shepherd had recovered fully from the previous winter. His honey gold coat shone again, and the dark saddle across his back remained uneven like a folded wing. A few silver hairs had appeared around his muzzle. His left ear still angled outward whenever he relaxed. He lived at Haven Ridge, where he slept near Walter's room and joined the residents for slow walks each morning. But a second bed now rested beside Caleb's hearth. Denise allowed Beacon to stay at the cabin on selected weekends. Their work remained simple: low-risk direction exercises, short searches for familiar objects, and community visits made in good weather. The arrangement suited Beacon because it did not ask him to choose one life over another. It suited Caleb for the same reason. He had stopped imagining recovery as a return to the person he had been before Evelyn's illness. That man belonged to another period of his life. Caleb had not reclaimed him. He had become someone new. He still valued quiet, but no longer used it as a wall. He still had mornings when getting dressed for a meeting felt heavier than it should. On those days, he called Nora or Arthur instead of disappearing. Sometimes he attended only half a session. Sometimes someone else finished his work. The network continued. That knowledge changed the weight of responsibility. On the first evening of the season's steady snowfall, Caleb and Beacon received a routine assignment outside town. Franklin Moss lived in a weathered one-story house near an abandoned silver claim on the northern slope. He was 76, with a narrow frame, large, rough hands, and a white beard trimmed close to his jaw. Years underground had left him with a deliberate way of breathing and a dislike of rooms without windows. Franklin had worked the mines until his retirement, then spent another decade repairing ventilation systems, because, as he told people, he preferred knowing where the air came from. His name appeared on the registry for 2 reasons. He lived alone, and one of his prescriptions had to be delivered before the road became difficult. There was no emergency. Caleb parked near the porch while Beacon stepped down from the vehicle and shook snow from his coat. Franklin opened the door before they knocked. "You're 5 minutes early," he said. "Nora builds that into the schedule," Caleb replied. She always did enjoy making punctuality feel like a moral achievement. The furnace was working. The backup heater had fuel. Caleb checked the exterior vent, while Franklin showed him the medication package Ruth had arranged. Everything was in order. Their official reason for visiting ended after 12 minutes. Franklin made coffee anyway. They sat near a wide front window while snow softened the old mining road outside. Beacon lay between Caleb's chair and the stove, watching Franklin break a plain biscuit into careful pieces. "You ask before feeding him," Caleb said. Franklin looked at the dog. "I was waiting for him to ask me." Beacon rested his chin on the floor. Franklin ate the biscuit himself. For a while they spoke about winter roads and the abandoned mine structures farther up the ridge. Then Franklin pointed to a photograph on the mantel. A woman stood beside him in summer sunlight, holding a fishing rod and laughing at something beyond the frame. "My wife, Marjorie," he said. "It's 29 years gone this spring." Caleb expected the familiar pause that often followed such disclosures, the moment when two widowers silently agreed not to look too closely at what the other carried. Franklin did not allow it. "She hated fishing," he said. "Wouldn't touch a worm. Came with me because she liked reading beside the river." Caleb smiled. "Evelyn planted flowers that weren't supposed to survive at our elevation." "Did they?" "Some." "Then she was right often enough to be dangerous." The conversation moved easily after that. They remembered women as people rather than losses. Marjorie had hidden candy in sewing tins. Evelyn had prepared extra food for guests who had not yet arrived. Franklin told a story about returning from a late shift to find his wife teaching two neighbors how to dance in the kitchen. Caleb described Evelyn labeling seed packets with instructions no one else could understand. Beacon slept through most of it. When Caleb stood to leave, Franklin carried 3 mugs to the sink. Caleb noticed the third one. "You don't drink from that one?" he asked. Franklin looked down at the blue mug. "No, Marjorie's." Caleb understood the habit. He had preserved enough objects of his own. Franklin turned the mug in his hands. "I used to keep it in the cabinet so it wouldn't break. Then I thought that was a poor use for a good cup." He set it carefully on the drying rack. The moment stayed with Caleb as he stepped onto the porch. The snowfall had thickened, but visibility remained good. Across the valley, dozens of lights shone between the trees. Some were holiday decorations. Others came from kitchens, workshops, and living rooms where people had already answered their winter lantern calls. Caleb knew the lights did not guarantee safety. A working furnace could fail. A road could close. A phone might go unanswered. The network was not a promise that nothing difficult would happen. It was a promise that absence would be noticed. Beacon stood beside him, his dark back gathering snow. Caleb placed one hand on the dog's shoulder. He did not tell himself that Beacon had saved him. That explanation would have been too simple and would have left too many people out. Beacon had appeared at his door and asked him to step beyond it. Nora had kept calling. Arthur had refused to let him travel alone. Ruth had given his knowledge a useful boundary. Gloria had shown him what leadership looked like before help arrived. Denise had taught him that affection did not grant possession. Walter had reminded him that usefulness could survive the end of a career. Even Harold had demonstrated that responsibility could mean standing publicly beside one's own mistake. Beacon looked toward the road. Caleb removed the evening checklist from his coat pocket. One name remained. A retired utility worker on the western edge of town had not yet confirmed his backup heat. Another volunteer was available, but Caleb and Beacon were closer. Franklin opened the door behind them. "You two heading home?" "Not yet." Caleb folded the list and returned it to his pocket. He looked down at Beacon. "All right. One more light." The shepherd stepped off the porch, then paused at the path. He waited until Caleb joined him. Together they walked toward the vehicle as evening settled across Silver Pine. There was no grand rescue ahead of them, no crisis hidden behind the falling snow. Only another house, another name, another person who would not have to sit in the dark, wondering whether the world had forgotten where he lived. Sometimes healing does not mean becoming who we were before the loss. It means learning to open the door again. To a neighbor, a new purpose, or one small light in the snow, Caleb was not saved by one heroic moment. He found his way forward because others kept showing up, and because he finally allowed himself to be needed without carrying everything alone. Perhaps that is one of God's quiet graces. He does not always remove the winter, but he reminds us that we were never meant to walk through it alone. Tell us what part of this story stayed with you. Share it with someone who may need a little hope, and subscribe for more stories about courage, loyalty, and second beginnings. May peace find your home, and may you always notice the light that is still waiting for you.